the greater the number of people who are involved in a movement, the greater the movement's strength. Uh, it, so my argument would be the strength is in numbers. The strength is not in your firepower. I think the firepower begets more firepower coming back at it, and is quite often ineffectual. The long game, what does it all look like at the end given some hypothetical confrontation between the people and those in power? That's going to depend on the number of people, regardless of whether the people have decided to take up arms or not. And I would much rather, as I kind of alluded to before, I would much rather be a part of a movement that is living its ideals and living to, at every step, the utopia that it attempts, the e-utopia. It's a word my professor once used, in Jim Dater at the University of Hawaii. A utopia is an unrealizable ideal future, and e-utopia is a realizable one. So you just put the letter E in front of utopia. I don't know what magic happens with the letter E there, but Jim said it, and I like Jim a lot, so I'm going with what Jim said. So we're talking about an e-utopia, and I would like for us to embody in all of our practices the e-utopia that we are trying to realize. I think it's going to be awfully difficult to walk back destruction and the underlying potential to go as far as violence if we have if that has been a central part of the revolution that we're talking about trying to create.
I would say that, like, reform, well, the environmental question is a good one to look at, because reform for the environment is a really good thing. Okay? If we could get some good protections in for the environment at this point, or actually at this point, if we could stop the totally inadequate protections that we have had for decades from being eliminated by the current administration, that would be a positive thing, sadly, for us. And when you look at movements, revolutionary movements, you see that they don't throw reform out, right? It doesn't make sense to say, well, to say if the system is changing towards the way that you want it to go, that's not good. The Black Panther Party is a great example. They had several programs, of course, much less known than the violent confrontations they had with the police, right, which we were addressing here, but well known within black communities and well known within the left community is that the Black Panther Party had extensive what they called survival programs, survival pending revolution programs. They gave away free shoes, they gave away breakfast for children. All the poor kids in the community would come and get breakfast from the Panthers before going to school. Thousands across the country, because the Panthers thought you can't learn anything if you're starving in the morning. And so they opened the first free health clinics in this country. And those breakfast programs are the ones that coerced, more or less the schools to have breakfast or lunch programs and stuff that for low-income kids. So it's when you look at revolutionary groups, they're not trying to bring about change now, and it's this concept of survival pending revolution, realizing that revolution is kind of a pie-in-the-sky utopist idea of having this perfect world afterwards. You need to keep the people fed, you need to protect the animals that are here now, the environments that are here now that are threatened now, even if your ultimate goal is to get rid of the system, to get rid of capitalism, get rid of property ownership and all these things. In the meantime, there are real consequences happening to real people. So that's another myth about radicals and about revolutionaries that I'd like to sort of make a point on, is that they're not throwing all of it away for the sake of this one idea. It's this concept is, while fighting for the world that we want to live in, for this bigger idea, you're hopefully making gains along the way as well. because these are real things that we actually really care about. We're not just fixated on this idea of what the perfect world would be afterwards. We're fixated on all these problems along the way, which has spurred us to become interested in like changing society. Reluctantly spurred people like me into become interested in like how can we accomplish this seemingly impossible thing of changing all of society so that it actually benefits all of us, and the mountains and the rivers and the animals as well. And I think I can say this across the board for radical groups, maybe with accepting some specific strains of leftism, but like in general, radical groups don't see what they're doing as the fix-all. It's a common myth that, you know, when you see somebody doing something that is more radical and then challenges you, you get defensive and you think, oh, what they think is doing is perfect. Nobody says like, oh, what the Sierra Club thinks is doing is going to fix the whole problem, because they're not really challenging you and they're not putting you in that defensive space. But when a group starts burning down multi-million-dollar buildings, you think, oh, they think they know the whole answer and that they're going to fix the whole problem with this one thing. But it wasn't that way, and I've never really seen it historically be that way. Most of the time, people have ideas about what radicals are like and that they're unreasonable and that they think they know the only way to fix things. But every time I've looked at and studied movements, including being involved in them, it's always been a matter of we are a part of a bigger movement. We're not going to tell people not to do education anymore. We're not going to tell people not to do civil disobedience anymore. I may or may not keep doing civil disobedience while I'm doing direct action, but you know, I think this is exciting that we're doing sabotage or some kind of radical action, but and it's powerful in a way that I've never seen before, but nobody ever thinks it's going to fix everything all at once. That would be totally irrational. So the whole concept of like coming in and just doing one thing in the middle of the night is going to solve the problem is really never the idea at all. And these buildings, you know, they do have insurance policies and they do get rebuilt, which kind of brings me to back to the point of the bigger idea of these radical direct action movements, are that they're really not trying to fix things here and fix things there on a case-by-case basis. They're doing actions where they can to build a movement that is hopefully someday potentially going to be strong enough to bring about what it is that we want to do. If we wait till the very last minute to use our last resort, we're saying, okay, we're going to defend ourselves if and when it really comes down to it. Environmentally, that's a whole other question, because what's left at that point? There's nothing left to the earth to defend at that point. But aside from environmentally, if you wait till the last minute, guess what? You're not going to be prepared. You have to build an apparatus. You have to build all the networks to create a movement that is actually fighting, which most of that, like 90-some% of it, isn't actually fighting. It's part of a bigger community of people working together to build a really effective resistance movement. And if you wait until the last minute to like figure out where the safe houses are, figure out how you can get money, figure out like, you know, if literature is illegal, like how you're going to get that through and how you're going to get your message across, guess what? You're not going to be able to do it. We need to start building communities that are capable of implementing things like that through this civil society that we're talking about, right? Through what we're doing here, right here tonight, by having discussions and surrounded by books and ideas and thinking about those in our private lives and then developing those ideas. Interestingly, one thing I didn't get to touch on earlier is that, you know, this idea of having a civil society where people can exchange ideas and hopefully we can progress in a positive direction for social change because we're able to talk and communicate. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us here, are familiar with the 2-year FBI investigation into this bookstore. When shortly after we opened up this bookstore, the FBI launched a 2-year eco-terrorism conspiracy investigation trying to say that this bookstore was a front to form an eco-terrorist cell, right? They put a lot of money into it. They had 2 informants. I'd give presentations all over the place on this thing. And what that really is, it's 2 things. First, it's a frame-up attempt because they knew it wasn't true, right? But what in a bigger sense, what it is an attempt to disrupt the civil society that we're creating here, the space that we have in order to talk about these ideas and work with each other and build a community that's strong. What they want is a divided and conquered community where the people who are more on the peaceful side think the radicals are horrible, and the radicals think the people on the peaceful side are naive and useless. And that's not effective either way. Like, what we need is a community that's together, and that while I don't find it worth my time to do what the other person is doing? I recognize the value of what they're doing, and together, maybe we all can create the type of movement in society that actually has a chance to progress. The movement really grew fast with a totally new, totally different kind of person when these actions were happening. And I want to point it out because a lot of these types of discussions are really class-based, and really based on these privileges that we never question in society. I did this interview when If a Tree Falls came out for Art Voice, rest in peace. And one of the points I concluded on is that it does not matter, that it won't matter at all how comfortable we are with violence or property destruction when the planet's dead, right? And we have these things about how comfortable we are with our movement or how comfortable we are in our actions, and they seem really important to us. But when you stop and look at the big picture, our comfort levels are pretty irrelevant when you're talking about the annihilation of the planet. You're talking about millions and billions of animals being slaughtered and all these other really horrific things. What we're comfortable with in terms of our actions to bring about social change is something we need to think about, but it shouldn't be our ultimate deciding factor on what we do. And when I was doing the press work for the ELF, surprisingly, it seemed like people were flocking to the Pacific Northwest out of nowhere, from every corner of the earth, to join this movement, and all they knew about it was that things were burning and that people were calling themselves anarchists and dressing in black, and protests were turning into riots. Like, they knew very little, and they were coming out of the woodwork to join. And like Portland, you can look at how much growth happened to Portland, Oregon, and I hate to say that like the movement is a gentrifying force in some of these places that become movement meccas. People just flock there, and it was not the kind of people I was used to seeing in these movements. When it comes to bringing about social change, like a certain kind of person seems to be attracted to it. No matter what war it is, they're going to be against, they're going to protest it, etc. They're oriented towards like wanting to go out in the street, or wanting to sign petitions, or wanting to organize, or wanting to do the kind of work that the movement is tend to be known for doing, organizing work. But what I saw with the radical environmental movement is that there was a different kind of person that never really came out of the woodwork when the idea was that we were going to protest, or we were going to do petitions and hold signs and write letters. I saw people energized and excited by the fact that this movement was fighting in a more direct and more destructive way. And I wouldn't want to make it seem as though I would discredit that. I think that there's a big place for people who may not be inspired by conversations so much, or by signing petitions, etc., but might be inspired by something like Vail Ski Resort burning down, right? And they seem like they just came out of the woodwork. And a lot of times I think we base this assumption on like, well, this is what social change is, and everybody's going to be uncomfortable with it. No. There were a lot of people who were not only comfortable with sabotage and destruction, but were inspired by it and wouldn't have joined the movement otherwise. These are the same people who, like to watch like monster trucks driving over cars, or who knows what, but this is a massive section of American society. Like, why is it that all of our, like so many of our relatives don't want to join the movement? One quick story, right? I've got a side of the family that I'm not very close with. They tease you a lot, and they're just kind of gruff and, whatever. And I wasn't, I never really took to them because they just seemed so gruff and like aggressive and unfriendly. And they never understood my politics. I was always a sissy or whatever, and they had all these terms, and I just kind of avoided them forever. And it wasn't until the film If a Tree Falls came out, which I'm featured in, that all of a sudden they got it. All this time of like me even knowing that I got arrested on the Washington Monument hanging a banner off it wasn't doing it for them, right? But as soon as they saw me in a movie where things were burning down and I was like, rah, 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 they were like, oh yeah, now we know. We knew it was in you all along. Like, it was funny. It was funny, but that's like a lot of America, right? It really is. There's all kinds of people out there who, it's not that they disagree with us, it's that they think we're wasting our time. If they see us doing something that they think makes sense, well, then they might join us. You know, it's not that they hate the environment necessarily and they don't want to join us, it's that they think that we're ridiculous and we're wasting our time. And so I think there needs to be a place for those people in the movement. I'm not saying that all the liberals are wasting their time, but I think there needs to be a place in the movement for people who want to engage in a different way besides comfortable, peaceful protest.